At the bottom left of your screen, you will see a blue chat icon and a hand icon. So if you're having technical issues, you can reach out to us by clicking on the hand icon, and someone will assist you. If you're unable to see the screen, please call the webinar support number at 800-843-9166 and dial *0. We are going to have time for questions at the end of the webinar, and you can submit those questions or comments to the presenters at any time by clicking on the chat icon again at the bottom left. We're recording the webinar, as you probably just heard, and we'll send out an email with both the presentation slides and the recording after its completion. So we're, again, so happy that everyone's here. We are going to be joined by a wonderful panel, including Joan from the Program Evaluation and Research Group at Endicott College, Amber Angel from the Family Resource Center at LA Valley College, James Stewart from DePaul University, and Teresa Bill from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So this webinar is intended to talk about concrete strategies and recommendations for building family-friendly college campuses, and also to help you as practitioners, advocates, educators, or service providers make the case about why supporting student-parent success is really important. We know that postsecondary education is a proven route to economic security. And supporting student-parent success can be a really powerful mechanism for reducing poverty, for improving academic and social outcomes for children, for strengthening racial ethnic equity, and also for improving the U.S. economy. IWPR is actually in the process of conducting a study to quantify the costs and benefits of college attainment for single moms, and what that also means for families and for society more broadly. But why should colleges, as higher education institutions, care about these students? Well, we know that student parents make up over a quarter of today's undergraduates, meaning how they do in school is directly linked to the performance outcomes seen by institutions and state higher education systems. Student parents are also increasing in number, and as college degrees are increasingly necessary to secure a good job, student parents are going to represent a growing pool of prospective students that institutions can draw from in order to boost enrollment. Student parents are also some of the most hardworking, dedicated, committed students who are likely to be some of institutions' most successful college graduates. They're actually more likely to have higher GPAs than students without kids, and with a little help, they would likely see significant gains in persistence, graduation, and transfer, all of which are good for the institutions in which they're enrolled. So we're going to talk about the range of possible approaches that institutions can take to building family-friendly campuses, specifically through the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit developed by Endicott. But to start off, I'm just going to share a little bit about what we know about the student-parent population nationally. So as I mentioned a little bit ago, the student-parent population is growing in number. There are about 4.8 million students who are parents of dependent children, and student parents have grown by about 45% from 1999 to 2012. And the number of single moms in college has more than doubled in that time. Single moms make up about 11% of all undergraduate students. So student parents are largely enrolled at public 2-year community colleges. Another 16% are at public 4 years. And I think it's important to note that a full quarter of student parents are enrolled at for-profit institutions, which we know to be not particularly good for conferring degrees that lead to quality employment and that can often lead to extensive debt. So a lot of thought needs to be put into how to direct student parents into high-quality educational institutions. A large share of student parents are students of color, and more than half of the low-income student parents are actually non-white students or students of more than one race. And as you can see here, single mothers are particularly likely to be students of color, with 37% of Black women, 27% of American Indian women, and 19% of Latino women in college raising a child on their own. So student parents are likely to live with pretty significant financial strain while they're pursuing a degree, with single parents being the most likely to be living in poverty. So 63% of single parents are at or below the federal poverty line, compared with 42% of all student parents and a quarter of students without children. This financial need has become actually more acute over time, and as you can see here, their ability to pay for college, measured by their expected family contribution, has actually declined much more sharply than for other students. And as of 2012, 60% of student parents had an EFC of $0. One way parents have attempted to make ends meet and deal with this financial strain is by working, something that a lot of students do. But nearly 60% of student parents work at least 20 hours per week while balancing classes, studying, and caregiving, which we all know is a significant amount of time on its own. That's compared with just 45% of students without children who work the same amount. And actually, we know that student parents' post-secondary outcomes are very sensitive to so much work. And IWPR analysis has shown that any amount of work for student parents results in decreased completion, whereas non-parents can see a slight bump when they work a few hours a week, so 1 to 15 hours. So with time at a premium, these work hours only exacerbate student parents' need for affordable, convenient childcare. Childcare is often one of the most burdensome expenses that student parents bear while they're in college, and it can often lead them to take on greater debt than they would otherwise. Unfortunately, as you can see here, the share of campuses across the country that offer campus childcare services has been steadily declining. As of 2015, under half of all community colleges and public four-years have an on-campus childcare center. On the flip side, we know, though, that access to affordable campus-based care is likely one of the most important supports that help student parents succeed. Both anecdotally and through some research, we've seen improved persistence and graduation rates, as well as transfer to 4 years for students who have access to campus childcare. That's good for both them and their families, and also the institutions in which they're enrolled. So this combination of financial and time demands that are faced by parenting college students, and particularly single moms, leads, unsurprisingly, to lower completion rates. Just 1/3 of all parents graduate with a degree or certificate within 6 years, with that rate falling to 27% for single parents. So what can we do to support student parent success, and what do they need to be able to persist successfully to a degree? First and foremost, campuses need to understand who's attending school. Almost no institutions collect data on parent status, and you can't effectively meet students' needs if you fundamentally don't understand what those needs are. So more data collection that understands who's parenting and who's not is really important. Campuses also need knowledgeable student support staff who can help connect parents to resources that can be helpful for them, whether or not those supports are on campus. Those staff should be aware that parents are going to need different supports than the quote-unquote traditional college students. So having an awareness of at least where they can go to learn more about what's available is pretty key. We've talked about access to affordable childcare, but also affordable housing and transportation are critical to helping parents remain stable while in school, as is targeted financial assistance and access to public benefits. These supports can help parents make ends meet while they're in school, but also they can pave the way for financial stability in the future. Tailored one-on-one guidance from a mentor or case manager, in addition to connecting with peers, can help students adjust to and engage with campus life, and also get access, again, to these support services that are so important for them to persist. And then state and federal policy are key mechanisms to improving student parents' access to supports. Greater funding, for example, for the Childcare Access Means Parents in School or C-Campus federal grant program would go a long way to improving low-income students' access to childcare. Financial aid reform that more accurately accounts for the extent of student parents' financial need, or even targeted grants or scholarships at the state or federal level that can target student parents, are just a few of the opportunities for policy to support student parent success. IWPR actually coordinates a student-parent policy working group. So anyone who's on the webinar today who would be interested in talking more about these policy opportunities, we'd love to have you join, and you're welcome to email me after the webinar. And finally, student engagement and advocacy are proving to be some of the most effective ways that campus-based change is happening. In more than a few instances, we've heard that student parents have been the ones to galvanize student support and get the administration on board to support their needs. And we think this is a population that's really ripe for building a movement that could change how institutions serve their student bodies. So at this stage, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker to talk more about a toolkit that can help schools and programs think through opportunities to strengthen their campus environments for students with families of their own. So Joan from the Program Evaluation and Research Group at Endicott, please take it away. Joan, I think you may still be muted.
Hello, this is Joan Karp. Thanks, Lindsay, from the Program Evaluation and Research Group at Endicott College. Hello, everyone. And so I'm going to talk about the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit, using data to improve outcomes, which was developed by my colleagues and I, building on tools that we developed for an earlier report on student-parent programs and student parents at four-year colleges. So the toolkit was designed to address a major problem that Lindsay also referred to, which is that most schools don't collect any kind of data about parents and students, which helps to make sure that they stay pretty invisible. Most schools have no idea even how many students they have who are raising dependent children, and no idea what their issues and barriers to success are, and also no idea how services are utilized by them that they find helpful. So the toolkit is designed as a self-assessment process to help collect this kind of data so it can be shared with others, so it can help raise awareness and hopefully get more resources and support for parents and students. I should mention that the organization Young Invincibles is working on adapting the toolkit for direct use by student parents themselves. The toolkit can help in learning more about student parents, who they are, their experiences on campus, academic progress, and existing resources that help them overcome barriers. It also includes, in the form of a rubric, a list of recommended practices that we learned about from successful student-parent programs in our earlier study. The ultimate goal, of course, is new institutional and other improvements leading to higher completion rates, which will also have major positive impacts on the children of these students. The toolkit's divided into three sections. Hopefully many of you have had a chance to download it. Getting started, collecting data, and making sense and moving forward. And the graphic shows how the toolkit process might look in its entirety over a 1 to 2 or possibly longer time period, starting with putting together a task force, it's the orange at the top, and ending with dissemination of results and advocating for change. Ideally, some parts of the process would be repeated every 2 to 3 years. Some may want to use just 1 or 2 elements included in the toolkit, which is fine, especially at first. And I'm going to point out a few of the big features and why you might want to use them, either as separate components or as part of the entire toolkit. So first, if you want to build a collaborative approach to improving conditions, we would strongly recommend convening a task force. And the toolkit includes some suggestions on this in the document labeled A2. Even if this is the only thing we do, according to our pilot schools, it will have good results for parents and students. We've outlined the work of the task force in relation to implementing the toolkit, but it could certainly be useful even if the other elements are not assembled, are not implemented in the present. If you want to know and be able to share what family-friendly resources and policies already exist at your institution, the document B1 in the toolkit provides a chart used to collect that information. And we found that so often students, staff, faculty don't know about these existing resources, and publicizing them can be an easy and useful thing to do. As we like to say, it can be the low-hanging fruit. For instance, people might know that there are family-friendly study rooms in the library if they exist, or they might not know the location of lactation rooms on campus. And these are very easy to publicize. The chart can also be used to help see gaps in resources. Oftentimes, people want to know more about the lives and experiences of student parents at their institution. And the student survey has certainly been used. It's also been adapted to hear directly from parents and students. And this has been really the centerpiece of the data collection for many of the schools that piloted the toolkit. Using tools like SurveyMonkey, it's very easy to gather the results, and SurveyMonkey will analyze a bunch of it in a very straightforward way. You can see the survey questions in the toolkit, and I mentioned schools have modified the questions slightly to make them. Other resources the toolkit includes find help for finding any institutional data that might exist on the campus. That's been a very challenging area for schools, but oftentimes some helpful institutional data can be found. It includes a list of successful practices that are part of successful parenting programs on campuses. I mentioned that before. We include guidance for leading student focus groups, and what we think is a simple data analysis guide and an action plan template and page of background research and references that people have found useful. So this is the list of schools that piloted the toolkit and gave us truly invaluable feedback on it. We met together on calls every 1 to 2 months or so, becoming really something of a support network to share successes and challenges in implementing the toolkit process. So we've asked 3 of the piloters to speak about the toolkit and their experiences with it and some outcomes. And they each spearheaded the toolkit self-assessment process from a very different vantage point in their institutions. So Amber Angel has been a parenting student for several years, initially at Los Angeles Valley College, where she has led the toolkit efforts as the program coordinator of the Family Resource Center. LAVC is a community college serving approximately 20,000 students. One of many special features about LAVC is that the president of the college is a very strong supporter of success for student parents. Teresa Bill, on the other hand, led her efforts as the coordinator of student parents at Manoa, otherwise known as SAM, a program specifically devoted to parenting students. She also works with low-income student parents across the university system. Her campus, the University of Hawaii at Manoa, is a Land, Sea, and Space Grant Research One institution with 13,000 undergraduate and 5,000 graduate students. And finally, James Stewart led his efforts from the Office of Adult, Veteran, and Commuter Student Affairs, where he is now the director. The office was aware enough to realize that student parents were heavily represented in their target populations, but had additional barriers to success that were not being well addressed. DePaul is a private Catholic university in Chicago, serving about 15,000 undergraduates. And I'll pass it on to Amber.
Thanks, Joan.
Hi everyone. Again, my name's Amber Angel. I work as a program coordinator at Los Angeles Valley College Family Resource Center. And a little bit about our institution. We are a Hispanic serving institution. We serve about 20,000 students annually. We are part of a 9-college district in Los Angeles County that is the largest community college district in our nation. We also have the only family resource center that is on a community college campus in California, specifically supporting underserved and disadvantaged students. And something I'm going to talk about a little later, we are also the only college in our district that has a workforce strategy center, which is charged with working with all 18 American job centers in Los Angeles County to get our students into living wage and meaningful employment. As you can see, some of our stats there, we have a very large non-traditional population. And I think that this speaks to community college across the country and that the landscape is changing. We're not serving, 18-year-olds right out of high school, and our services need to reflect that. So some of the things that we learned from implementing the toolkit was, first of all, just how many student parents we actually have. On that previous slide, I mentioned 29% of our students on our campus are raising children, something we had been supporting our student parents, but in an indirect way, not really knowing actually who they were. And furthermore, looking at data across our entire district, we've learned that 35% of our students across all 9 of the colleges are raising children. Being able to pull this data was huge. We worked with our Office of Institutional Effectiveness that we pulled onto our task force to do this. Ourselves, as Joan was mentioning, some of the documents in the toolkit that allowed us to really think this way was really starting with our profile of campus resources. It jump-started our work and really forced us to dig deeper into what supports were already in place. This wasn't about starting from scratch. It allowed us to build relationships that have continued to strengthen efforts in supporting our parents across the campus. When we started this data collection, it really kind of spoke for itself. And in our conversations with our task force, it really kind of prompted everyone in their own student population to think about whether or not this data would look similar for their students, specifically with our workforce department. It allowed us to be intentional about who we were serving and in what way we were serving them. So if you're looking at this question, one of the questions in our survey is, what is the most frequently reported challenge? And it's worded differently in the survey. And 70% of our student parents responded that they didn't have time to study. So how are we supporting our students on our campus and allowing them to have that study time with their children? You can see on the right-hand side, our student parents are first-generation women, low income. I think this speaks to the national data that Lindsay shared with you earlier. So here's some of the services that we support our student parents with at the Family Resource Center. And since implementing our toolkit and expanding our services not only to our students, but also across the campus, we were able to do this more intentionally. The awareness and attention that this toolkit has brought among our college administrators and our department chairs and directors has allowed us to implement some of these new supports and specifically apply for new funding that's directed for student parents, which all stemmed from collecting the data that we were allowed to do. Strong Workforce is funding that came through California and was administered for CTE, Career Technical Education Pathways at community colleges. We were able to use our data of our student parents to apply for further funding to continue our efforts and work towards this. As I mentioned in the previous slide, finding time to study is a really big challenge for student parents. I know it was for me. It's hard to go to a library and study with a 2-year-old banging on your laptop, and I had 2 of them. So we implemented a kid-friendly study lounge. With our Strong Workforce dollars, we were able to expand that so parents could come in and study, and we had childcare that was offered. On our task force, we had a member of our assessment center, and he, as we started this conversation about these challenges, thought, well, actually we have a lot of students that are coming in and they need to take this 2-hour English math assessment, but they have a kid with them and a stroller, and we don't have childcare. So we were able to collaborate, and we expanded our study lounge into the other side of campus, now have a proctor on site, and allow our assessment to take place while we offer childcare. We are recognizing that our students are hungry, that this is a national issue that's across campuses, across colleges, across the country. And we were able to forge a partnership with our CalWorks department, which is also supporting students on our campus, and provide fresh organic produce weekly to our student parents and to any really underserved or student in need. Through this strong workforce dollars that we were able to get from our data, we this year, 2017, won the State Chancellor Student Success Award for an innovative program, and that was, really huge for our campus. As we were having this conversation about looking at our population and realizing how siloed it was, our Dean of Workforce and Adult Education recognized that a lot of the similar challenges we were talking about our student parents are facing, his workforce participants were facing. So we were able to write a grant that forged our partnership through a California EDD fund, Workforce Accelerator, that allowed us to get Strengthening Working Families. And in fact, 51% of our students on campus that are going through workforce training, 51% are parents. And they had even more challenges and needed referrals to community agencies. And since being able to have this relationship of offering student parent support and sending out this survey to get some of this data, we've had an 89% employment rate upon graduation. We're leaving this Friday to the Futures College Assembly Conference in Florida to compete for the Bellwether Award in Workforce Development. And then lastly, before I hand it over, I know James and Teresa are both going to have different things to talk about regarding the toolkit. Lindsay mentioned funding and C Campus being a huge support for student parents. And I think one thing that if I want everyone to take away from this toolkit is it's not about reinventing the wheel or starting from scratch. So one thing the Family Resource Center doesn't do is childcare. We're not a licensed childcare facility. We recognize that while childcare is extremely important for student parent success, there's also all these other barriers that impede their ability to be successful, whether it's workforce training or study time or advisement or free baby clothes and diapers and formula. We knew we didn't have to do childcare. And through our assessment and through this toolkit, we were able to forge a relationship with the already existing child care center on our campus. With our data that we received from the toolkit, we wrote a C Campus grant and received funding to add an additional school-age classroom to our already existing center that now allows us to serve 56 more student families by giving them access to after-school childcare until 10 p.m. at night so these students can take night classes. And with that, I think you're going to hear from Teresa.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Teresa Bill with the Student Parents at Manoa program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and we have one dedicated staff person and are part of the Women's Center. So we're small, but our program exists and we have staff, so we are beyond emerging. We're developing. We have traditionally focused on serving low-income student parents, particularly undergraduates. We're very aware that our student parents are the role models for their children's college aspirations and attendance. We are a commuter campus. Most students, parents, and others attend class, leave campus immediately, and are often on their way to work. Long commutes to campus for student parents is always a factor. So, On implementing the toolkit, I'd like to share that we're still in the process of developing and refining our action plan. I also, from our perspective, really want to impress that the toolkit is useful for programs of all sizes. It's very flexible, and everyone should make it their own. The tools are quite flexible, and as Joan pointed out earlier, pieces can be used independently. There's a method to the process as a whole, but nothing is cast in stone. Really, the takeaway for the toolkit is make it work for you. Our challenge as a campus has been identifying a quote-unquote champion for our work with student parents and engaging administrators who have influence, impact, and resources, and engaging them in this process. We decided to get our task force started primarily with direct service folks to get the process started initially, since we didn't have a champion to actually convene the task force. Later in the process, we rebooted our task force and added administrators who could become our champions, like the Dean of Graduate Education, when we came to them with data showing the needs of graduate student parents. Over half of our survey respondents were graduate students, and this was a finding amongst other pilot schools who also have heavy research institutions and graduate students. And as I had indicated earlier, our office has prioritized serving undergraduate student parents. But childcare, both formal and informal, are at the top of both undergraduate and graduate student needs, and so is food insecurity. And these created an entry for our discussion with the Dean of Graduate Education. And actually our program is collaborating and we're intensifying our SNAP outreach. A few things we learned from the survey and the process that are informing our work. The institutional data and survey data correlate and identify that student parents are transfer students. And it wasn't surprising, but it's more students than we expected. We knew there was a need for transfer student integration to our campus in general. 3 large community colleges feed into our campus. We are currently developing and implementing a student-parent transfer fair prior to the start of the semester to specifically engage student parents who are overwhelmingly transfer students. So this is a student-parent transfer fair. We want our student parents to connect and to know campus resources early. Additionally, it wasn't new for us, but the data indicating that undergrad student parents are overwhelmingly first-generation college students informs our partnerships and work going forward. It remains key that the specific needs of student parents are integrated with and inform the work and programming of other campus programs serving first-generation college attendees. Another item we gained more specific info about is when asked if student parents were aware of subsidies from our state child care subsidy office, it was quite apparent that an outreach and informational campaign for the subsidy needs to be more effective. And this subsidy is particularly useful for single parents. And this is a need that we're moving forward, this informational campaign. Changes that we've seen by implementing the toolkit, our outreach to conduct the online survey resulted in increased visibility, not only for our program, but for student parents in general and their needs on campus. So we're having discussions with new offices and new people. The profile of campus resources and campus self-assessment are very helpful. This helps your campus identify what's available, and our task force learned of additional resources. Some of them are on campus, and some are in the broader community, like the child care subsidy. The campus self-assessment tool identifies best practices as a goal, so you can share that with others, but there's a continuum from 0, nothing being done on this issue, to emerging with various levels of functioning. For example, While a dedicated office for student parents is a goal, knowledgeable staff who can direct students to resources may be part of a different office, but they are visible and available, so that's emerging. Our survey confirmed that what I'm, quote, small emergency grants would be very useful for retention. 71% of our respondents indicated that. We're, as an office, interested in pursuing means to fund an emergency grant program, and that's something that will need larger partners beyond our university. The survey also indicated practically zero participation in campus activities beyond the classroom. But these same students also identified family activities on campus as something very useful and necessary and they would participate in. Focus groups we conducted articulated the lack of and loss of any previous social programming and the meeting and networking space for student parents on campus. So we have been partnering with Campus Life, a partnership we had desired for quite some time, and the toolkit process facilitated the development. This has led to programming that's more family-friendly events. So some of the Friday night movies are actually movies that children would like to see as well. A longer-term action item is developing space on campus that parents find child-friendly or welcoming, which they indicate is necessary for them to consider bringing their child or family to campus. We've been successful with small grants from student government for programming specific for student parents. We have a family happy hour concert series featuring children's music. We were funded for a Halloween weekend camping retreat, all expenses paid. Some weekend field trips to the Imaginarium and a local train ride and subsidized athletic events. It's the data from the toolkit that helps us justify the need and the numbers of student parents on campus. And our student government monetary budgeting folks are really tight with their money. You got to prove, who you're serving. So even though our campus is still looking for a strong champion for student parents, our program is building relationships and implementing low-cost items on our action plan, like providing more opportunities for networking, access to peer mentors, decreasing social isolation, the so-called low-hanging fruit that Joan was talking about. Meanwhile, we're continuing to develop an action plan with other items requiring more resources than currently available, increasing childcare access, developing family-friendly spaces, both priorities identified in the survey. One takeaway I'd like to share is that data analysis can be simple. SurveyMonkey serves a need. But if there are some additional resources, more detailed or complex analysis can be obtained. Our office had access to a statistics whiz grad student who assisted with cross-tabulation, and we find a lot of differences between graduate student and undergraduate student needs. So we had access to that, but our community college colleague is implementing a very basic survey using SurveyMonkey. Another item is that funding incentives, we use them for our focus group participants. Student parents are very busy, and we're asking for their most precious time. Overall, I'll end with the reiteration of make the process your own. The toolkits offered us data to approach our admin with concrete plans and needs. And in the short term, the data is also helping us prioritize and develop programming. So with that, I think James is next.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Amber. I'm James Stewart from DePaul University. As was said earlier, DePaul is an urban institution. We're the nation's largest Catholic institution and private. But being an urban setting and with a mission to serve those underrepresented students, we have a highly non-traditional population. 20% of our undergraduate students are over the age of 24. And so we knew we had a number of students with children. And our Office of Adult, Veteran, and Commuter Student Affairs had always adopted this population as an important population to serve. So it was great to have an opportunity to work with the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit to try to get data, because we know the importance of data and being able to prove what we might know anecdotally in getting resources and making a case for better service for these students. Now, the data was helpful, but one of the things that I think led to the biggest tangible changes came from our task force, which is why I'm going to spend my time talking about the task force itself. This group of people that you see on the screen, who made up actually 16 participants in total on our task force, became the spokespersons and allies for this population across the campus and helped make changes from often their different offices and perspectives in real ways for our students. In assembling the task force, we were very intentional about offices to involve, like our Dean of Students, who works with crisis with our students. Title IX, we know of the federal Title IX mandated protections for students who have children. We of course wanted to involve student parents themselves, because we didn't want to be a group of administrators and educators sitting around talking about data related to these students without their voice in the room. We included, because we're a part of Student Affairs, the out-of-class experience, we included several of our partner offices. That ended up being a real asset to this, because they instituted a lot of change that I'll talk about in a second, from our Student Activities Office to New Student and Family Engagement that works with orientation here. There have been some changes to our diversity offices, but at the time they were two separate offices mentioned there. We had an Associate Vice President serve to allow upper leadership to have a stake on this. Our fitness center was involved because it's one of the only places on our campus with actual child care. So it was important, even though their offering was small, it was still something, and we wanted to acknowledge that and give them a seat at the table. And of course, we involved some people from our institutional research area and academic advisors. I mentioned before, this group actually ended up being a group that would, after looking at the data, go back and do a lot of change in their own way from their own perspectives. And that's some of the, it made it into the action plan, but it also, from their vantage point, allowed them to really contribute. For instance, the Dean of Students Office and the Title IX Coordinator worked to make a resource page that's on our website for students with children. It tells about Title IX protections, but also mentions lactation rooms, other services on campus, so it kind of centralized the place to get information for them. Our Student Activities Office worked to find programs and events throughout the year that, for just the simple bringing sitters into a room adjacent to an event, could make an event family friendly. So for instance, they made a service site at last year's service day, have one of the service sites be a site in which people could bring their children. Or our dance marathon, which is a 24-hour dance to raise money for children's hospitals, had some hours on Saturday morning that were family friendly, and students who had children were encouraged to bring their entire family. Orientation reworked their language about how to be more inclusive to all types of families in invitations, and thinking about the family components of the program being appropriate for all ages. Our diversity offices worked to have childcare as speakers in some of their larger events. So you can see these are just some of the changes, but real tangible ways that partners, after seeing this data and being so involved in the process, work to make changes on their end as well. A little bit more detail about how we actually used the task force. We only met 5 or 6 times. We wanted this to be as little work as possible for the individual task force members. So our office really burdened coming to the table with a lot of the homework done to get the feedback and perspective from our partner offices, and then to take whatever they gave insight in the meeting and go back and do more work with that. So some examples of what they did help in modifying our survey and focus group. A nice thing about the toolkit is you do have the ability to take the template survey or the focus group questions, but also tailor them for you. For instance, a modification we did, we had our Title IX coordinator sitting on our task force. We had an entire section that asked specific questions if you have been pregnant during your time at DePaul University, which got to whether or not there might have been some potential violations of Title IX policy occurring, and allowed a nice way to study that. They assisted in the self-assessment. You know, our office, from where we sit, knew about resources on campus, but we absolutely learned about informal and formal programs that were attracting our students with children by having such a diverse group together to do the self-assessment portion of the toolkit. As I've already been mentioning, they became strong advocates across the campus. An example that is a staff person from the orientation office who was serving on the toolkit had not known that one of their own student workers even had been a parent. But being on this committee and talking about it, the student felt comfortable to share and learn that tidbit about their student, and talked about and had some real raised self-awareness about how much they don't think about it as an identity in students that they work with. They really helped us in analyzing the data as well. You know, there's a tremendous amount of data you get from this survey. It's got a lot of questions. It takes a student completing it almost 20 minutes to take. So all of that wealth of data, having so many different perspectives, allows them to be looking at it, for instance, an academic advisor from their perspective about what are students saying about signing up for classes, and able to pinpoint and zero in on the items that they notice. If we had to do over a few changes we would make, I would involve them more in the data process. As mentioned prior, we tried to not burden the task force too much, so we'd really done a lot of initial data analysis and came to the group with themes, really, that we had already discovered and questions that related to those themes. But I would have probably tried to subgroup the offices and have them help us a little more in the initial analysis of different areas, and some more input and follow-up on the final report. But overall, it was a great experience. Some tips: we worked really hard to involve all of these offices. They were giving up a lot of time and energy to involve in this process and making the experience at DePaul better for our students with children. And so, for instance, if scheduling for such a large group could be difficult, if someone could not make a meeting, we made a point to try to make up that meeting with the individual person, even if it was over coffee or over a lunch, to try to still get their perspective on each meeting's content. So that took work, but I think it was worth it. And again, also helping pull out their unique perspective. We were intentional on the offices that we put on the committee, so we wanted them to think about their office's mission related to this population, and sometimes we needed to assist them in seeing where there were items of data connected to their office's mission. And finally, I wish we would have gotten back together a little more after. You know, it's been a year or so, and I know there are tangible items on the action plan that have become accomplished, but like a lot of things, time passes and you wonder, are we continuing to make the change we want to make for our students? So that's something that certainly is on my mind, and hopefully we can have a reunion of our task force soon. I think at this point I'm going to be turning it back over to Lindsay.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. That was really interesting, and even though I've heard all of you speak about your experiences, I feel like I learn something new every time. So thank you. At this point, we have some time for some questions, and we have received a couple that I can kick it off with. There was one question about some of the data that I spoke about related to decreased completion as a result of work hours among student parents. And the question is, has IWPR or anyone else looked at the impact of working while in school on post-graduation employment, i.e., does working while in school improve odds of employment after graduation or increased earnings or anything else? So thank you, Matthew, for your question. IWPR has not specifically looked at this. I believe that Anthony Carnevale and his group at Georgetown did do a report called Learning While Earning a couple years ago that explores some of the effects of working while in college. So I'll refer you to that report because that's the one that comes comes to my mind immediately, but if you have, other questions about that, you're welcome to email me. My guess is that if there are some students who are kind of, as this report describes, workers while in college as opposed to being a student who's working. And in those cases, it's possible it may be beneficial, but I can't say for sure. The next question we had come in was from Robin, and she asks, can you speak to what are some of the stated reasons that universities do not include questions regarding parent status at the admissions or application process? So I'll let one of the speakers from universities answer that if you guys want to take it. I can offer my opinion on that. I think to a large part, especially kind of what James was just talking about, how there is this conception of who a college student is, and parent status really doesn't enter into that mindset. And I think that could be one of the fundamental reasons that you're not seeing questions on parent status. It's also not something that's typically required for anything. The FAFSA does include a question about whether or not you have dependents when you apply for financial aid. But there's a whole process that goes into working with your financial aid office to get that data and disaggregate it by whether or not someone has a dependent and so forth. So if any of our speakers have anything to add on that, please feel free to speak up.
Yeah, I would add, this is Joan. I think that I'm not sure legally or if it's a smart idea or if students would actually say on the admissions for fear of discrimination whether they are parents. But we did notice some schools are trying to get that information through questionnaires after people have been admitted or after they've said that they'll be matriculating. It's one of the things that schools are changing, is trying to get their schools to ask at that point.
Yeah, and I will say that I know, for example, that in Washington State, the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges does have a question on its admissions forms, and that's the only system that I've heard of that does ask about parent status. But as your question, Robin, indicates, it could be pretty easy as just putting one question on an admissions form. So some more questions have come in. Barbara asks, she's curious whether there is a summary report of what all the campuses who implemented the toolkit have done. So Joan or anybody else, are you guys planning on doing anything like that?
We have some information from the schools, and although the study is over, I think we'll come back around and try to get more information. At some point, if we get funding, we'd love to study the schools, but yeah, we will try to collect what's been happening.
Great. I think that would be really useful for everyone who's interested in kind of using this in the future. So here's another question from Jean. She says, we're wondering about any of your possible collaborations with institutional research and assessment offices in conducting the survey. So for some of our speakers who conducted the survey on your campuses, can you speak a little bit about how you made that happen?
Well, I can. We involved them on our task force. So we had a staff person from that office that was one of those 16 people, and we had to obviously get IRB approval for our survey, Institutional Research Board approval, because it involved human subjects, and it was mandated actually that like our office and like me as head researcher and such could not get the list, so they actually did the distribution of our survey using FERPA data. So they really were instrumental in getting some demographic data on the population we're going to be sending it to, but also the actual dissemination of it.
And I can speak to it a little bit too. This is Amber from Valley College. We also had staff from our Office of Institutional Effectiveness on our task force. We did ours, I believe, actually, of all of, and Joan, you can confirm this. I know I worked with Elizabeth on this, but I believe we were the only college that didn't give over the access to the survey while it was being conducted, because we didn't. That allowed us to not have to go through the whole IRB process. We gave our questions to our Office of Institutional Effectiveness, and they distributed it. So that way we didn't have to have any of the, we didn't have to hand over any of those rights or confidentiality. And because we were able to do that at the beginning, we were able to do it quickly. Therefore, we sent out our survey twice. And our data, we do have questions on our application status into the district now that asks if they are a parent. And then in our survey, it broke down how many children and what age, so we could have a better sense of the parents that we were serving.
This is Teresa, and I'll share that our process, actually, we received permission to distribute via email to all students on our campus, and then we had a filter question at the front. And so what our ability to work with institutional research office is more challenging, but after our survey, we've identified areas where the institutional research office can help us with some more data that's more protected than we were able to offer in the survey, so that you can get larger numbers for our campus.
Thanks, everyone. So here's a question from Rona. She says, a question for the school that collected data about parents in the student population. How did they do this? Internally funded, externally funded, and the rough cost of doing so. So a little different from the last question. How did you guys, did you use funding for this, and how did that work? Anyone want to take this one?
Well,
so this is Teresa.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, as a pilot institution, we received a small grant from the from Endicott. Like, it ends up being about $5,000, but we also ended up using our own institutional resources, dedicating some of our things, because it wasn't necessarily expensive, but outreach, printing, and incentives for our focus group folks ended up being a couple $1,000, and then we actually absorbed the cost of our graduate student analysis. I think the larger cost is implementing items on your action plan.
This is Joan. I'll just say that you need somebody to put the survey into SurveyMonkey, and you need name and contact information. So it doesn't, and then obviously you have to decide who will analyze it, but SurveyMonkey will give you, just spit back out some initial analysis of a lot of the questions. So if you have money, that will help. If you don't, you can also go ahead and get some good information.
Great, thanks you guys. So we have, I think, time for one last question, and Larissa asks, what experiences, tips, or strategies do you have for seeking external financial support for student-parent scholarships, grants, or resources? Amber, you guys have been super successful, and I know you spoke a little bit about this in your presentation, but if you or anybody else has any tips, please share.
I think a theme across this whole presentation has really been highlighting the need for data collection. I think when you can justify why you are applying for this type of funding and what your population is, and the need for it, I think you have a greater chance of being successful. I mean, I think that I think we're on the beginning of a wave of looking at students on campus holistically, seeing them as a whole person, recognizing they have these needs and challenges. But a lot of students on campuses have needs, right? We have a lot of funding going towards first generation or foster youth or hungry and homeless or veterans or athletes, and that's all wonderful. You look at student parents, the data, if you can say your campus has 29% of your students, that's all of those students combined. And so I think being able to, whether it's sending out a survey internally on campus through an office, or it's working higher up and getting the question on your admissions packet, but collecting that data, I think, is the first huge step.
Great, thanks, Amber. So it's just about 3 o'clock, and I want to thank everyone on the call for joining us today for this webinar. Just a reminder, we will be emailing out the recording and the slides to everyone, and we'll also be posting it on IWPR's website. So, and you have our email addresses here. I can also send it to you personally. So thank you so much. Thanks to our speakers for a wonderful presentation, and we hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much.